The massive crystalline ships descended from the void like falling stars, their surfaces gleaming with an inner light that had witnessed the birth and death of countless worlds. For 10,000 years, these vessels had carried the same message to every new species that dared to reach beyond their home planets, pay tribute or face annihilation. The Galactic Council had perfected this system long before humanity had learned to make fire. It was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its efficiency. New species emerged from their primitive worlds with dreams of exploration and discovery, only to learn that the galaxy already had rules. Old rules. Unbreakable rules. The Zephyrians came first, as they always did. Their ship was a monument to crystalline perfection, each facet reflecting the light of distant stars. Inside, beings of living crystal pulsed with energy older than Earth's sun. They had been the first to master faster-than-light travel, the first to map the galactic spiral arms, the first to demand payment from lesser species for the privilege of existing in their domain. Behind them came the Vorthons, their bioships growing and shifting like massive living organisms. Where the Zephyrians were crystal and light, the Vorthons were flesh and function. They had evolved beyond individual bodies, becoming a collective consciousness that spanned entire star systems. Their ships breathed and pulsed with organic life, capable of reproducing themselves given enough raw materials and time. Last came the Ethereals, barely visible even to advanced senses. They existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that most species could not even comprehend. Their phase ships flickered in and out of reality, sometimes solid, sometimes mere shadows against the stars. They were the oldest of the three powers, having transcended physical existence eons ago. Each species represented a different path of evolution, a different way of conquering the challenges of galactic civilization. But they all shared one thing in common: they demanded tribute from newer species. The system worked because it was predictable. New species would emerge from their home systems with their crude FTL drives and their naive dreams of peaceful exploration. They would encounter the tribute fleets. They would protest, negotiate, and eventually submit. It had happened thousands of times across thousands of worlds. Earth's orbital stations were still under construction when the tribute fleets arrived. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 5 years earlier, and their technology was laughably primitive compared to the established galactic powers. Their ships were clunky metal constructs held together with welds and prayers. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles that would bounce harmlessly off the shields of any respectable alien vessel. The aliens barely bothered to scan the human fleet that came out to meet them. A few dozen ships, maybe 50 at most. Typical for a species that had just discovered FTL travel. They would learn their place soon enough. Ambassador Lee Hanna was waiting in the diplomatic section of Earth's primary orbital station when the alien representatives arrived. She was younger than most ambassadors, having risen through the ranks with unusual speed. Her superiors had chosen her for this first contact not because of her experience, but because of her ability to remain calm under pressure. The station's main diplomatic hall had been hastily prepared for this moment. Holographic displays showed Earth's blue marble spinning slowly against the black of space. Translation equipment hummed quietly in the background, ready to convert alien thoughts into human language and vice versa. The Zephyrian representative materialized first, its crystalline form catching and reflecting the station's artificial lighting. When it spoke, its voice resonated like wind chimes in a storm. The translation system converted its words into precise, formal English. "Greetings, new species of the world you call Earth. We are the Zephyrian Collective, masters of the crystal domains. You have achieved faster-than-light travel and thus must now participate in the galactic order." The Vorthon representative followed, its biomass flowing through the station's corridors like living liquid before reforming into a roughly humanoid shape. Its voice was the sound of 1,000 whispers speaking in perfect unison. "We are the Vorthon Unity, the collective consciousness of 1,000,000,000 minds. Your species shows promise. You will contribute to the greater whole." The ethereal representative simply appeared, phasing into normal space without warning. Its form flickered between dimensions, sometimes visible as a vague humanoid outline, sometimes appearing as nothing more than a distortion in the air. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are the ethereal transcendence, beyond the limitations of singular existence. Your tribute is required for the maintenance of galactic stability." Lee Hanna listened carefully as each representative explained the tribute system. It was, they assured her, a fair and necessary arrangement. New species lacked the wisdom and experience to govern themselves in galactic affairs. The established powers provided protection, trade opportunities, and guidance in exchange for modest tribute payments. The demands were presented on quantum-stable materials that would last for millions of years. The Zephyrians wanted 10% of Earth's gold reserves, to be delivered annually. The Vorthans required complete technical specifications for all human military technologies, including encryption codes and weapon designs. The Ethereals demanded cultural artifacts, literature, music, art, and historical records that would help them understand human civilization. As Hannah read through each demand, she could feel the alien representatives watching her with the patience of beings who had performed this ritual countless times. They had seen every possible reaction. Some species begged. Some tried to negotiate. Some even attempted to fight. But in the end, they all submitted to the inevitable. The galaxy had rules, and those rules had worked for 10,000 years. There was no reason to expect that this time would be any different. The council chamber stretched out like a cathedral of stars, its walls transparent and showing the endless void of space beyond. Dozens of alien species filled the vast room, each contained within their own environmental bubble that kept their unique atmospheres separate from the others. The air shimmered with energy fields and translation matrices that converted thoughts and words between hundreds of different languages and communication methods. Hannah walked slowly across the polished floor toward the center of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, the only human sound in a room full of alien breathing, clicking, buzzing, and humming. She wore a simple black diplomatic uniform with Earth's blue and green emblem on her shoulder. Compared to the elaborate costumes and exotic forms around her, she looked almost plain. But every eye, sensor, and consciousness in the room was focused on her. The three major powers had arranged themselves in a triangle around the central speaking platform. Each represented thousands of years of galactic dominance and the collective will of entire stellar civilizations. The Zephyrian war speaker stood like a living sculpture made of pure crystal. Its body was a complex geometric form that caught and reflected the chamber's lighting in dazzling patterns. Energy pulsed through its crystalline structure in slow, hypnotic waves. When it moved, it made sounds like wind chimes mixed with breaking glass. Its species had conquered gravity itself, building cities that floated in the hearts of stars. The Vorthan collective representative was harder to look at directly. Its biomass constantly shifted and flowed, sometimes appearing almost human, sometimes becoming something that hurt to perceive. Thousands of smaller organisms made up its body, each one a separate mind contributing to the greater consciousness. It breathed through pores that opened and closed across its surface, and when it spoke, the words came from multiple mouths that formed and dissolved as needed. The ethereal ambassador was barely there at all. It existed primarily in dimensions that human eyes could not see, appearing only as a faint outline that flickered in and out of reality. Sometimes it looked like a tall, thin humanoid figure. Sometimes it was just a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, as if the chamber itself was speaking. Behind these three major powers, representatives from dozens of other species watched the proceedings. Some had been paying tribute for thousands of years. Others were relatively new to the galactic community but had already learned to follow the established rules. All of them understood what was happening here. A new species was about to learn its place in the galactic order. Hannah had spent the last week reviewing everything humanity knew about galactic politics, which was not very much. Earth had only made contact with alien civilizations 6 months ago, and most of that contact had been simple trade exchanges and basic cultural information sharing. This was humanity's first formal diplomatic encounter with the major galactic powers. She had also spent considerable time thinking about her childhood in Seoul. Her parents had been diplomats themselves, and they had taught her that sometimes the most important word in any language was no. They had told her stories about her grandfather, who had refused to bow to occupation forces during the war. About her grandmother, who had stood up to corrupt officials even when it meant losing everything. Courage, her father had always said, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else is more important than fear. The Zephyrian war speaker's crystal form pulsed brighter as it began to speak. Its voice resonated through the translation field, coming out as precise, formal English with an undertone that sounded like grinding stone. Young representative of the species called humans, you have had sufficient time to review our tribute requirements. Have you reviewed our generous terms? The word generous carried layers of meaning in the original Zephyrian language. It implied not just kindness, but also the power to choose between kindness and cruelty. The translation system captured some of this nuance, making it clear that this was not really a question. Hannah looked directly at the crystalline being. In her peripheral vision, she could see dozens of other alien representatives leaning forward with interest. This was always the most entertaining part of first contact with a new species. The moment when reality set in. "We have reviewed your terms," she said clearly. The Vorthan collective's biomass writhed with what might have been satisfaction. Its multiple voices buzzed in harmony as it spoke. "Excellent. Then present your counterproposal. We are prepared to negotiate within reasonable parameters." This too was part of the standard ritual. New species always tried to negotiate. They would ask for lower tribute amounts, longer payment schedules, or alternative forms of contribution. The major powers would appear to consider these requests, make small concessions, and eventually reach an agreement that looked like compromise but was really just a more palatable form of the original demands. The ethereal ambassador said nothing, but its flickering form stabilized slightly, becoming more visible in normal space. This was how it showed attention and patience. Hannah took a deep breath. She thought about her training at the academy, where she had learned 17 different ways to say perhaps we could find a mutually beneficial alternative in diplomatic language. She thought about the detailed negotiation strategies that Earth's government had prepared for this moment. Then she thought about her grandfather, who had looked armed soldiers in the eye and refused to kneel. She looked at each of the three major powers in turn. The crystal being that could shatter planets. The biocollective that could strip worlds of all life. The phase-shifted entity that could attack from dimensions humans could not even imagine. And she delivered humanity's response in a voice that carried across the vast chamber with perfect clarity. "No." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. No explanation followed it. No diplomatic hedging or careful qualifications. No counterproposals or requests for clarification. Just one word that no one in the chamber had ever heard in response to a tribute demand. The silence that followed was so complete that Hannah could hear her own heartbeat. The word "no" seemed to echo in the vast chamber long after Hannah had spoken it. For several heartbeats, nothing moved. The assembled alien representatives sat frozen in their environmental bubbles, as if the translation systems had malfunctioned and they were waiting for the correct words to appear. Then the Zephyrian war speaker exploded into motion. Its crystalline form blazed with brilliant orange light that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The geometric patterns on its surface shifted and twisted into sharp, aggressive angles. When it moved, the sound was like a mountain of glass shattering all at once. "You dare refuse?" The war speaker's voice cracked through the translation field with such force that several smaller species physically recoiled in their bubbles. "No species has ever." "There must be some misunderstanding," the Vorthan collective interrupted, its biomass writhing and churning like an angry sea. Dozens of small eyes opened across its surface, all focusing on Hannah with calculating intensity. Perhaps the translation matrix experienced an error. "Your species could not possibly mean to reject tribute." The Vorthan's voice carried undertones of frantic mental activity as thousands of individual organisms that made up its collective consciousness tried to process what they had just heard. In 10,000 years of galactic history, this scenario had never occurred. Their probability calculations had no framework for handling outright refusal. The ethereal ambassador's reaction was the most disturbing of all. Its barely visible form began phasing rapidly through multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating ripples and distortions in the fabric of spacetime itself. The air around it shimmered and bent, and several sensitive species in the chamber began making distressed noises as reality seemed to twist near the ethereal's position. Hannah stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos. She had expected anger, but the sheer magnitude of their shock surprised her. These beings were genuinely unable to comprehend what had just happened. It was as if she had told them that gravity worked sideways or that time flowed backwards. "The translation was perfect," she said in the same calm voice she had used before. "Humanity's answer is no. We will not pay tribute to your civilizations." The Zephyrian war speaker's crystal form pulsed so brightly that emergency filters activated on several viewing screens around the chamber. "This is impossible. Every species pays tribute. It is the foundation of galactic order. Your species is clearly suffering from some form of collective mental illness," the Vorthan buzzed, its biomass forming and dissolving mouth-like openings as it spoke. "We can provide medical assistance to correct this obvious defect in your reasoning processes." The ethereal ambassador stabilized slightly, becoming more visible as it focused its attention on normal space. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from inside everyone's head simultaneously. "Perhaps they do not understand the consequences of their words. Explain to them what happens to species that refuse tribute." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense diplomatic pressure that Hannah had ever experienced. The three major powers took turns explaining exactly what tribute refusal would mean. They brought up holographic displays showing the destroyed homeworlds of species that had tried to resist galactic order. They shared statistical analyses proving that tribute was economically beneficial for developing civilizations. They offered increasingly generous terms and alternative payment schedules. Other species in the chamber began joining the conversation, adding their own voices to the chorus. A reptilian delegate from the Saurian Confederation spoke about how tribute had brought stability to their war-torn worlds. An insectoid representative from the hive clusters explained how tribute payments had accelerated their technological development by centuries. "You must understand," said a gaseous being whose voice sounded like wind through caves, "tribute is not oppression. It is partnership, protection, guidance from those who have walked these paths before you." Throughout all of this, Lihanna listened politely and asked clarifying questions. She took notes on a small digital pad and nodded thoughtfully at various points. But every time someone asked for her final decision, her answer was the same single word: no. The assembled aliens grew increasingly frantic as the hours passed. They had protocols for every possible diplomatic situation, but none of those protocols included this. Some species tried appealing to human emotions, painting pictures of the wonderful cultural exchange that tribute would bring. Others attempted logical arguments about economic necessity and galactic stability. A few species even tried threats, though these were quickly discouraged by the major powers. Threatening a potential tribute species was against established diplomatic practice. Finally, as the second hour drew to a close, the Zephyrian Warspeaker's crystal form settled into a new configuration. The bright orange glow faded to a deep, ominous red. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Very well. Since your species appears incapable of rational thought, we will provide you with time to reconsider. You have one standard galactic month to review your position and submit the required tribute payments." The war speaker paused, letting the implication sink in. "If you maintain this position, at the end of that time, we will be forced to take what is owed by other means." "War," added the Vorthan collective, its biomass shifting into more aggressive configurations. "Complete military conquest and subjugation of your species." "Total annihilation," whispered the ethereal ambassador from somewhere between dimensions. "Your worlds will be stripped of all resources. Your species will be relocated to labor colonies. Your civilization will become a footnote in galactic history." The ultimatum delivered, the three major powers began withdrawing from the chamber. Other species followed, casting uncertain glances at Lihanna as they departed. In the space of 2 hours, she had become the most notorious diplomat in galactic history. When the chamber was finally empty except for her escort team, Hannah activated her quantum communicator and sent a brief message to Earth. They didn't take it well. The response came back almost immediately from Admiral Kim Day, commander of Earth's defense fleet. "Good. We were getting bored out here." Across human space, from the lunar shipyards to the mining colonies of Mars to the research stations orbiting Jupiter, humanity began preparing for what was coming. They had 1 month to get ready for a war against the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. It was going to be interesting. The month that followed Lihanna's refusal was unlike anything Earth had ever experienced. Every shipyard, every factory, every research station buzzed with frantic activity. Engineers who had never spoken to each other before found themselves working side by side, sharing ideas that military regulations said should have been classified for decades. Dr. Park Minute worked 18-hour days in the lunar shipyards, her hands stained with coolant fluid and her eyes red from staring at holographic blueprints. She had been designing civilian transport ships just a month ago. Now she was figuring out how to turn cargo containers into kinetic weapons that could punch through crystalline armor. "This is impossible," her assistant muttered as they watched another test firing. "Our weapons are too primitive. Their shields will stop everything we have." "Then we don't use weapons," Minute replied, watching the data streams from their latest experiment. "We use physics." Across the solar system, similar conversations were happening in every human settlement. On Mars, colony engineers were stripping mining equipment to build electromagnetic launchers. In the asteroid belt, prospectors were rigging their ships with ramming charges and guidance systems. On Europa, scientists were developing new forms of quantum entanglement that could coordinate attacks across light years of distance. The work was desperate and brilliant and completely insane. Humanity was trying to compress centuries of military advancement into 30 days. It should have been impossible. But humans had always been good at doing impossible things when their backs were against the wall. When the alien fleets finally arrived at the edge of the solar system, they came in 3 massive formations that blotted out the stars. The Zephyrian crystal ships moved like a glittering constellation of death, each vessel the size of a small moon and bristling with energy weapons that could crack planets. Their hulls sang with harmonic frequencies that could shatter matter at the molecular level. The Vorthan biofleet was even more disturbing to look at. Their ships were living things, grown rather than built, with hulls that pulsed and breathed like massive organs. Some vessels sprouted tentacles that could wrap around enemy ships and dissolve them with acid. Others carried spore pods that could strip the atmosphere from an entire world in hours. The ethereal phase ships were barely visible even to the most advanced sensors. They flickered in and out of normal space like ghosts, sometimes appearing as solid vessels, sometimes as mere distortions in the fabric of reality. They could attack from dimensions that human science barely understood, making them nearly impossible to target or defend against. Together, the three fleets represented enough firepower to sterilize a dozen star systems. Humanity met them with 4 to 7 ships. The human vessels looked pathetic compared to the alien armadas. They were crude metal constructs held together with welds and determination. Their hulls were scarred from hasty modifications. Their weapons were chemical projectiles and nuclear warheads that belonged in a museum by galactic standards. But as the alien commanders studied the human formation through their sensors, a few of them began to notice something odd. The human ships were positioned in a very specific pattern, one that didn't match any known military doctrine. And they seemed to be towing something behind them. The Zephyrian war speaker opened communication channels, expecting to receive humanity's surrender. Instead, Admiral Kim Day appeared on their screens. Kim was 63 years old and had been commanding ships since before humanity had reached Mars. His hair was steel gray, his face was lined with scars from 3 different colonial wars, and his eyes held the calm certainty of a man who had already made peace with dying. Human fleet, the war speaker's crystal form pulsed with authoritative energy, you are outnumbered 300 to 1. Surrender now, and we will show mercy to your species. The Vorthan collective's biomass writhed as it added its own voice to the communication. You still have time to pay tribute. We will accept double the original amount in exchange for your surrender. The ethereal ambassador simply materialized on the channel, its form flickering between dimensions. Submit or die. Admiral Kim looked at the 3 alien commanders with the expression of a man who had heard similar threats many times before. He had fought pirates in the outer system. He had faced down corporate militias during the Mars Rebellion. He had commanded the defense of Europa when the mining consortium tried to claim it by force. No, he said in the same calm voice that Lee Hanna had used a month earlier. The first shots were fired 30 seconds later. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. It wasn't really a battle in the traditional sense. It was a demonstration of everything that made humanity dangerous: creativity, stubbornness, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The human ships scattered immediately, but not randomly. They moved in coordinated patterns that had been practiced obsessively for the past month. Behind them, the objects they had been towing became visible as massive asteroids fitted with guidance systems and acceleration drives. The humans had turned the asteroid belt into a weapon. Zephyrian crystal ships found themselves under bombardment from rocks moving at significant fractions of light speed. Their energy shields, designed to stop exotic weapons and high-tech projectiles, were overwhelmed by simple kinetic force applied with surgical precision. When Vorthan bioships tried to use their acid tentacles to dissolve human vessels, they discovered that the humans had coated their hulls with reactive armor that turned acid attacks into explosive chain reactions. When the bioships released atmosphere-stripping spores, human ships detonated nuclear charges that incinerated the biological weapons before they could spread. The ethereal phase ships were the hardest to counter, but human engineers had found a solution even for that. They had modified their quantum communication systems to create dimensional anchors that could drag phase-shifted vessels back into normal space, where conventional weapons could destroy them. But the most effective human tactic was also the simplest: they refused to give up. When ships were crippled, their crews kept fighting from whatever sections still had atmosphere. When weapon systems failed, humans rammed their vessels into enemy ships and detonated their reactors. When all else failed, humans in vacuum suits attached improvised explosives to alien hulls and triggered them manually. The battle lasted 3 days and nights. When it finally ended, the solar system was littered with debris from hundreds of alien vessels. The 3 great tribute fleets that had dominated the galaxy for millennia were either destroyed or fleeing in broken formations toward the edge of human space. Humanity had won the impossible war with impossible tactics and impossible determination. And the galaxy would never be the same. The news traveled through quantum communication networks faster than the broken alien fleets could limp home. Within hours, every civilized world in the galaxy knew what had happened at Sol. The impossible had occurred. The tribute system, unchanged for 10,000 years, had been shattered by a species that most galactic citizens had never even heard of. On the crystal worlds of the Zephyrian Empire, entire cities went dark as their inhabitants tried to process what they had witnessed. The War Speaker's defeat was being broadcast on every channel, showing massive crystal ships cracking apart under human asteroid bombardments. For a civilization that had never known military defeat, the images were incomprehensible. In the biocolonies of the Vorthan Collective, millions of individual organisms that made up the greater consciousness experienced something unprecedented: doubt. The collective mind that had calculated the probability of human resistance at less than 0.001% was now frantically recalculating everything it thought it knew about galactic politics. The ethereal transcendence simply vanished. Their phase ships retreated to dimensions that no other species could reach, where they could contemplate this disruption to the cosmic order without interference from normal spacetime. But the real shock waves were felt among the tribute-paying species. On the water world of Aquatica, the dolphin-like cetaceans floated in their great ocean cities and whispered a word they had almost forgotten: freedom. They had been paying tribute to the ethereals for 3,000 years, sending their most brilliant minds to serve as computational slaves in the phase ships. For the first time in millennia, some of them began to wonder what might happen if they simply stopped. The insectoid hive clusters received the news through their queen mothers, who had long ago accepted tribute as a necessary part of galactic existence. But now, as they watched recordings of human ships ramming Vorthan biovessels, some of the younger queens began to ask uncomfortable questions about why their people should work themselves to death mining crystals for alien masters. In the great tree cities of the plant-based Verdani, ancient root networks that served as their communication system carried a new kind of message. For generations, they had sent portions of their harvest to the Zephyrians, accepting it as the price of peace. But now, as they watched crystal ships burning in human space, they began to remember what it felt like to keep the fruits of their own labor. The rebellion started small and quietly. A few species simply delayed their next tribute shipments, claiming technical difficulties or bureaucratic delays. The major powers, still reeling from their defeats at Sol, were too weakened to respond with their usual overwhelming force. Lee Hanna returned to the Galactic Council 3 months after the battle, but this time she was not alone. Admiral Kim Day walked beside her, his uniform bearing new scars from the recent fighting and several medals that Earth had created specifically to honor those who had stood against impossible odds. Behind them came representatives from 12 other species. The cetacean ambassador moved in a portable water tank that allowed her to swim while participating in diplomatic functions. The hive cluster delegate was actually a collective of 7 different insects who spoke in perfect unison. The Verdani representative was a mobile tree whose roots had been specially adapted for interstellar travel. All of them were species that had been paying tribute for centuries. All of them had watched the battle at Sol with growing amazement. And all of them had decided that they were tired of kneeling. The council chamber was only half full when the session began. Many species had chosen not to attend, uncertain about what was happening to the established order. The 3 major powers were represented, but their delegations were smaller and more subdued than usual. Lee Hanna walked to the center of the chamber just as she had 6 months earlier. But this time, she was not delivering a simple refusal. This time, she was announcing the end of an era. The age of tribute is over, she declared in a voice that carried clearly through the translation fields. We have proven that the system can be broken. We have shown that no species needs to bow to another simply because they are older or more powerful. The remaining Zephyrian delegates flared with angry light, their crystal forms pulsing in aggressive patterns. You dare to dictate terms to your betters? The tribute system maintains galactic order. The Vorthan Collective's representative writhed with frustrated calculations. This is chaos. Without tribute, there will be wars. Conflicts. The galaxy will tear itself apart. The ethereal ambassador flickered into partial visibility, its voice carrying undertones of ancient authority. The established order has kept peace for 10 millennia. Your actions threaten the stability of all civilized space. Hannah listened to their protests with the same patient attention she had shown during her first visit. Then she looked at each of the 3 major powers in turn and gave them the same response that had started everything. No. No, humanity would not return to the old system. No, they would not pay tribute. No, they would not allow other species to be enslaved by tradition and fear. The words seemed to hang in the air like a physical force. And then, one by one, the other rebel species added their own voices. No, said the cetacean ambassador, her translated voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of forced servitude. No, buzzed the Hive Cluster Collective, their unified voice representing billions of individual minds finally speaking for themselves. No, rustled the Verdani delegate, their words carrying the authority of entire forests that had decided to keep their own harvests. One by one, species after species stood up and delivered the same simple message. No more tribute. No more bowing. No more accepting oppression simply because it was traditional. Within a year, the old Galactic Council had collapsed entirely. The three major powers retreated to their core systems, no longer able to project force across the galaxy. Some species continued to pay tribute out of habit or fear, but many others followed humanity's example. The galaxy did not tear itself apart, as the major powers had predicted. Instead, it became something new. Trade networks formed based on mutual benefit rather than forced extraction. Defensive alliances emerged to protect smaller species from remaining predators. New technologies spread rapidly as species no longer hoarded their discoveries for tribute payments. It was messy and chaotic and sometimes violent. But it was also free. Years later, when galactic historians tried to understand how such a massive change had happened so quickly, they always came back to the same moment, a young human diplomat standing in a council chamber and saying one simple word. When they asked Lihanna herself how humanity had changed the galaxy, she would smile and give them the same answer that had started the revolution. We just said no. Sometimes, that really is all it takes.